David, let's go back. Somebody said about what camera would you recommend is the best or the easiest to get going with light painting? I suppose it's for long exposures and everything else really is the main one, isn't it? Digital without a doubt to begin with, because you can see straight away.
Yeah, I'll talk you through how my journey evolved. That's probably, there's nothing better than speaking about your own experiences. So I started off with a Canon 1000D, a very basic entry-level DSLR. But the key thing is you want to make sure the camera you're buying has something called bulb mode, okay? Bulb mode allows you to surpass that boundary of 30-second long exposures and run very long exposures, which is required for a lot of making this work. So yeah, an entry-level DSLR, which is what I made a lot of my early work with, and a lot of the images you've seen tonight were captured using it, so you don't need anything overly special. Just through natural evolution, my gear's improved over the years. I think I'm currently using a 5D Mark III, soon to be upgraded actually. I'm not going to brave mirrorless just yet. I've got too much gear. Yeah, you'll find your own way with your own photography equipment, but just remember a camera with bulb mode is necessary, and you want to, and just buy a relatively cheap cable release as well, to stick in the side of it, so you're using the little switch cable releases to start and stop your exposures with. That's in terms of kit, that's as basic as my advice gets, really. It doesn't need to be any more complicated. Just make sure you're using a relatively wide lens, a lens that you would use to shoot landscape with, because I see my light painting work as an extension of landscape work. I've done a lot of landscape photography in the past, and my light painting work was born out of long exposure landscape photography. It's kind of landscape photography on steroids, isn't it?
So do you shoot something like a 20mm or an 18mm or 24? What's your go-to lens?
Yeah, my go-to lens is my 24mm prime lens.
And you shoot prime? You don't shoot zoom?
Never. No, I've become so accustomed to using my 24mm lens. I like getting things, physically right in terms of how the scene's going to look, and placement of my tripod and so on through the viewfinder before I kick things off. I kind of get everything in place, and a zoom lens will be very practical and useful, of course, as well, in terms of being able to crop in and get to certain areas quicker, maybe. But I've just become so used to using my 24mm lens.
Yeah. Filter or no filter? I gather they might be on about graduates, or they could even be on about skylights. Let's answer both of those. So skylight first. Do you use a skylight?
I'll quite simply answer in terms of what I have or haven't used in the past. So before my practice evolved into light painting work, I was shooting a lot of landscape and seascape work, and I was very often using graduated ND filters to darken the sky and so on. And that's what led to my obsession with long exposure photography and using things like the big stopper, like a 10 grad ND filter, and really slowing things down, even in daylight hours. But my work transgressed towards nighttime photography because of my interest in long exposure photography. And so I experimented with things like star trail photography, and eventually that led into light painting. It was kind of a natural evolution, really. But yeah, ND grad filters, I've used them maybe twice at nighttime when there's been a very bright sky because of a full moon. I felt the need to darken the sky slightly. Otherwise, they're just straight out the lens, nothing else added a majority of the time.
Okay. Somebody asked, do you think Olympus cameras work even better for LP, as you can effectively watch the effect as the images build up? Do you know something about that? Because I've got I'm not a tech.
Yeah, I do. They've got like a live light painting mode, which is incredibly cool. So because I teach every month, I'll teach one or two groups a light painting workshop. And by the way, anyone that's listening, I'm up in Scotland. If you ever want to join, you'll find them on my website as well. But there's nearly every workshop I teach these days, well, maybe one in every two workshops, there's always somebody that's got an Olympus camera with a live light painting view on the back. And it's funny because we all stand in a line at the back of the studio, when one person goes up to make the work each time, and you can see people kind of, looking over to the camera, the Olympus, because they can see the light painting in real time being made. I know some professional light painters that use Olympus for that reason, because it helps them gauge what they've made so far, and they might want to go back in and add something else. But as you've seen, because my light paintings tend to follow two kind of primary shapes or forms of sculptures in terms of ribbons and orbs, I kind of know what I'm getting when I make my work. So I don't personally feel the need to jump down that rabbit hole just yet. But my goodness, it is very cool. And there's a project I'm working on this summer that may require the use of an Olympus for that very reason.
Okay, good. Put a blog out there. You never know. If you don't ask, you don't get, do you? By the way, I've never had a free camera in my life yet. That's something. After all these years, you know, I think I get something cool for free. But
me neither.
Yeah, me either. Right. Let's go back to the Tai Chi guy, because I quite like that idea. They're on about Tai Chi and a light in their hands and feet.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think this will work? I'd say give it a go anyway, and if it doesn't work, don't worry about it. But any tips on that, perhaps?
Not tips as such, just perhaps, well, I guess maybe one tip, just again, through experimentation, be mindful of the speed at which you're moving, because that will have a profound impact on how bright the lights appear or don't appear to the camera. So you can play around with the speed of the movement and the types of movement. But it's a wonderful idea. I often speak to people in my workshops about, because I teach photographers who have other jobs. You know, in fact, several photographers I've taught run dance schools. There's maybe 3 people in the last year, strangely. And then I often end up having a conversation about this notion of having professional dancers use light sources to move around in the dark so that you're capturing their movement, which is a beautiful idea. So yeah, same would apply to Tai Chi. It's a really lovely idea. And as I say, because I know Tai Chi holds a very kind of therapeutic kind of stronghold as well. There's a real element of that flowing through it. That would be a lovely marriage between Tai Chi and light painting. Let me know how you get on with that.
Yeah, I think that would be good to actually hear from anybody. So make sure you show us this stuff and things, really. I actually did some with dancers, but I was a tight git. I bought some of the cheap inspection lamps. You know, when you fill up with petrol at the garage and they kind of give you the offer of the day, it's like £3 for something, you know. Well, they had these inspection lamps and ones that you could charge, and I bought a few of them, and we worked for years with. In fact, I bet you can still find some of that stuff on Academy. But yeah, it's a bit of good old fun, and we just used to put gels over the front, but of course there's hardly any light coming out of them. Workshops. Let's talk about the workshops a minute. How many do you have on a course? I think that's a really good point as well.
That is a good question. I'll give 2 answers to that because it varies. So when I'm paid to visit a school, for example, I often ask the teachers to limit the classes to 10, okay? Because having 10 kids waiting to light paint, sometimes on an individual basis, I don't want them waiting too long, if that makes sense. So we have to get through the line of people. When I teach my own private workshops to photographers, which they're 4 hours long, so they're quite immersive experiences, I teach groups of 4 or up to 5 max, because I like to maximize the learning experience for each person that attends. So I keep my groups quite small. And when I teach my outdoor light painting workshops, I only make my outdoor workshops accessible to those who I've already taught in a studio, because I know, having attended one of my previous workshops in a studio environment, they'll have the confidence to come out at night time into a landscape setting, because it's a very different proposition. You don't get to switch the studio light on and off between takes. So yeah, small groups. The outdoor groups are normally no larger than 6 people, but the indoor ones are normally 4.
Okay. Can I shoot this kind of thing on a smartphone?
Some smartphones do have a light painting setting nowadays. I've seen a couple of devices that do, and it just means they can do sort of bursts of long exposure, you know, footage that you hold it still and you will get some light moving through the image. The resolution will be god awful, by the way, compared to a DSLR, so just prepare yourself for that. But they will capture it, yeah.
Yeah, okay. We talked about the aperture. You said f8 that f5 you start with, isn't it? Yeah.
That's normally a good starting point. But if I'm using a light painting tool that's particularly bright, I can find myself up at f11 sometimes. I've made a lot of, the more abstract work we looked at. There was all those tiny little boxes, the light paintings on their own. I do make a lot of abstract light painting work, which not in the landscape, just in a blackout studio. And for those images, I don't need to expose for the length that's required for the landscape. So if I'm using a particularly bright tool, I can just do f11 and run the exposure length as long as I need or want. If I'm outdoor, you need to run the length of the exposure, you know, to thereafter sufficiently exposed for the landscape. So different prospect of working indoors and outdoors.
Sorry, I'm just trying to. I should have clicked through
That's all right.
got rid of the questions that as they were coming through. Some really beautiful kind of thank you. Somebody logged in late and they're gutted. Don't worry, we've recorded it. Blah blah blah. Olympus cameras. Walking towards. You talked that it's usually from left to right, right to left, and obviously you're waving the wand. Somebody's asked us about walking towards camera or further away. Is that still a good result?
It is, and when I make a light painting that kind of leads off into the distance, I tend to normally start from further back and then move towards the camera. I don't like walking back, moving backwards without knowing what my footing is, especially when I'm working in the dark. In the studio, it wouldn't be a big deal, but outdoors, yes. But I tend to walk towards the camera. Just be aware of one thing. If you're using something like a lightsaber and you are walking directly towards the camera, it will compress, it will foreshorten the light painting, okay, it'll squish it. So even although you think you're making a really cool light painting, it might just mash it into a single condensed shape, which isn't very pretty. I tend to find that when you're working with a tool that creates a broad line, like a lightsaber or a light blade, working either parallel to the camera or diagonally away from or towards the camera yield the best results.
I suppose it's because you really want a sharp light, isn't it? Otherwise, it's just a blurry light the majority of the time, I would have thought.
Yeah, and the quality of the light painting tool has a big say in this as well. So if anyone does, wants to have a look at my ebook, there's 40 plus tools in the ebook that are kind of laid out one by one.
Yeah.
And it's important to know about what's out there, because if you just experiment with light painting using pretty lousy light painting tools, it's very easy to go off the notion of going any further with it because you're just not getting the results. A lot of the results, the more impressive results, are kind of gained because of the advancements that have been made in light painting tools, like I was talking about earlier. So don't feel disheartened if you're making a bit of a mess early on. It might just be that you're not using the right kind of tool.
None of us are good kissers when we first start, are we?
Speak for yourself.
Very good. David, honestly, I've got to ask the one. Somebody's bought some light panels, LED light panels for food photography. Do you think that this would work on location?
To light paint with, to illuminate the location with?
I think it's about using it as a light source, I gather.
You could. The only thing you need to, well, in fact, light panels, I've got a couple actually just over my shoulder in my studio that I use for my macro photography when I'm photographing food, interestingly. You can alter the brightness of them. So you could, I like light painting tools that you can alter the brightness of, because then you can find the appropriate aperture that's not going to mean a really long exposure outdoors, because obviously the higher the aperture, the less ambient light gets through. So yeah, have a play around with them and keep them on. Change the power of the light to see at what point it starts to blow out and become overexposed. You'll find that point quite quickly, I would imagine. Just remember that it's not only the brightness of the tool that will have an impact on when it overexposes, but it's also the speed at which you move it. So the marriage between aperture and speed of movement are kind of, they go hand in hand.
I suppose if they find they've got a bit too much power, even though it's low, it's set in, chuck some coloured gel on the front, isn't it? And that's going to lose a stop or two, kind of guarantee. Put some ND on it, you're going to start reduce it down. But what have you got to lose? If you can afford going out in the garden for an hour, putting your camera on a tripod, just give it a go. Yeah. I mean, that's really what the message is to everything in photography, isn't it? Especially Absolutely. In the art world, is just give it a go.
I remember in the early days, like I said, there was no such thing as a light painting tool when I started. It was just find tools online that illuminate, are portable, and experiment. I remember once running around with a cheese grater with a torch shining out of all the holes, and creating light paintings doing that. It's a bit of creative thinking as well.
Yeah, if anybody complains about the tools that you use, just give them a pinhole camera and let them go.
Yeah. Yeah, don't run around with cheese graters in the dark.
No. I won't go on. I'm not going to say what I was going to say. David, thank you. Absolutely amazing. Head over David's Instagram page, hit the follow, the like, and whatever you do. because if you don't, you're an idiot. I've just followed him. So basically, keep in touch. Go over to the site, have a look at the ebooks, spend some money with this man on a workshop or wherever you're going, because you're going to have a fun time in photography, and that's what photography is about. And you might just find yourself in a totally different world that you ever expected yourself to be in, and things really. For me, thank you very much, Dave. It's been a great night.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And I can't wait for Laura to book you in again. So another 8 images. See you all soon.
Keep in touch. Yeah, 8 is it's a pretty rigid limit, isn't it? It's I do a lot of 2-hour presentations on light painting, and I normally get through 100 plus. So that was a challenge tonight.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for joining us live. We'll see you in a few weeks' time for another Talk Photography. Thanks, David. Take care of yourself. Bye bye.